Hello and welcome, everyone. I hope everyone's having a great Thursday, your pre-Friday to your Friday, if you will. My name's Hayden, and I have the honor and privilege to be your moderator today for today's presentation. I'm excited to see how today's topics will assist you and your team in taking not just your SharePoint environment, but your business to the next level. Few things to mention as we jump in. First, you may have noticed that as you joined, all mics are muted. This is by design. If you have any questions or comments during the presentation, we do encourage you to utilize the QA chat feature in your toolbar for Teams, where our team will be able to reply to you in real time. Once the webinar concludes, we will be moving into a live Q&A session, which at that point we will allow people to unmute their mics or use the chat feature to ask additional questions to our team, not just about what we cover in today's webinar, but pretty much any of your M365 environment questions, but we'll go over that in more detail later. Also, be in your lookout for the next webinar in your emails as we continue to move in this year with more and fresh content. But at this time, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Michael to give you all a brief message. Over to you, Michael.
Thanks, Hayden. Hey, everyone. If you've been here before, you know what to expect. This isn't a sales and marketing thing for dataBridge. This is an hour of learning for you. So we're going to highlight not only new features that Microsoft has rolled out, but also how they may impact you guys. What changes might you need to make? How does that affect compliance or security? Some of those type of things. And while we will highlight new features that roll out for SharePoint 365, Teams, Copilot, OneDrive, etc. Sometimes, like in today's session, SharePoint list versus Excel, sometimes it's reminding you of the power that lives in SharePoint. So I think you'll enjoy that one as well. Hayden may have mentioned it, but towards the end, not only will we answer Q&A on anything that you've seen today, we'll do that during the presentations if you want to put that in the Q&A area. But we're open to any questions you have. We'll do our best to answer them at the end as well. So with that, I'll kick it back to you, Hayden. Let's get started.
Sounds good. Thank you so much, Michael. We do have a jam-packed schedule today, so I don't want to spend too much time, but Barry's going to be starting us off with helping us understand the role of a site assets library. Dylan will then go over the new Copilot Cowork AI agent, which is very exciting news from the AI side of things. Leona is then showing us some key differences between SharePoint lists and Excel, and when you should probably use one or the other. And then last but not least, Kelly Ann will be teaching us the first of 4 parts for preparing your SharePoint environment for Copilot and AI in general. Without further ado, let's go ahead and jump on into our first topic, understanding the role of the Site Assets Library, taught by Barry. Over to you, Barry.
All right. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about the Site Assets Library, what it is, and why it's so important to your site structure. What is the Site Assets Library? It's a system-created library that comes with every SharePoint site by default. The Site Assets Library usually works behind the scenes and out of sight of the general users. You can think of the Site Assets Library as a storage hub for the content that powers your site's functionality and design. So some of you may wonder what exactly gets stored in the Site Assets Library. Items usually found in a Site Assets Library consist of essential files like images used on pages. That could be logos, banners, icons, etc. Documents embedded in web parts, videos, custom scripts or templates, and other supporting resources that make modern SharePoint pages look polished and perform effectively. So why does this matter? Because without proper site assets management, your site can quickly become disorganized, slower to maintain, and harder to scale. A well-managed site assets library ensures branding stays consistent, pages load the correct resources, and important content is centrally stored rather than scattered across multiple locations. The governance of the Site Assets Library is just as important as the library itself. Without proper organization, folders, metadata, standard naming conventions, etc., the library would become disorganized and have many unused assets. Managing who can access the library is just as important to limit accidental deletions, but just note that all users will still need at least read access to the library so they can see the data being displayed on the pages. So now I'm going to take you into a live look, kind of show you how to get to the site assets library. So from here, I just have a sandbox built. So this is a standard home page, like everybody's going to have. You click on your gear and you go down to site contents. And then from here, you'll see your site assets library listed with all of your other document libraries. Now, if you click on that, so for here, you have your site pages folder. That's going to store all of your images and documentation, that type of stuff that you're displaying on your pages. I'll go into that in a second. You'll also see I have a header background and the view logo Earth. That's my icon. So all of that gets stored within Site Assets Library. So from here, we're going to go into Site Pages, and you'll see I have that home page, which you just saw. I have a sample page and then a sample error page to go over. So with the sample page, I'll click on it, turn it into images for you. So you'll see I have 4 headshots that is on this sample page, along with a background image. So if I go to the sample page, now you can see how those images are being displayed with that background image. All of these images and that background image is all being pulled from that site assets library. So now back into the site assets library, if I go back to site pages and then go into sample error page, you'll notice I have deleted those images out of that sample error page. So now I'm going to show you what it looks like if a user doesn't have access to the site assets library, or someone moves those files or deletes those files. So when you go to the page now, those web parts are still there as placeholders for images, but you're no longer getting your background and no longer seeing those images. So that's why it's very important. It's kind of the backbone of your site itself. So within that sample error folder, nothing exists. So that is the site page. But if you remember under the site assets, that's where your header and logo is. So those still get displayed. So now key takeaways. The site assets library is not just a storage library like another document library. It's literally the foundation that keeps your SharePoint site running smoothly. And then if you manage it well, then your entire site will benefit. Back over to you, Hayden.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Barry. Yeah, a couple of quick things there. Even though it's a document library, it has a specific use case in that document library functionality. So it's not for all of your team collaboration documents and things of that nature. So if you are a key SharePoint manager or maybe part of the marketing team, sometimes it's nice to do just like an internal audit, making sure teams are using the right assets and different things that match up with your branding files if that's appropriate. That was perfect, Barry. Thank you so much. We'll now go to our next segment, which is taught by Dylan, who will be teaching us about the new Copilot Cowork AI agent. Over to you, Dylan.
Everyone, yeah, so in today's presentation, we'll learn about the Copilot Cowork. So this new feature right now, it's still in the early preview state right now for those in the Frontier program, which is just something you're able to join and get those early features that are coming out, a lot more of the agent side of things. If you're in that Frontier program, it is currently available through there. And basically what this is this is part of Microsoft's, what they're calling their Wave 3 rollout of the more agentic capabilities. So, allowing where these AIs, the different agents can do long-running automated multi-step tasks on your behalf. So it's whatever you have permissions to or abilities to, it can potentially do multi, step tasks or actions, using its different skills as opposed to just being more of a chat, giving you a response, that type of thing. So this is that new feature there. And this is powered right now by Anthropic's model. So they made a deal with Anthropic. And you'll notice if you're familiar with Claude Cowork, this has the same name of Cowork. So they've made a deal with them. And I wouldn't call this necessarily a white label. There is key differences with it. So they have their own version of it, but it's very similar. Key difference between, let's say, Claude Cowork and this one, the Copilot's Cowork agent, is that all of these sessions, the outputs from those different tasks, they happen in the cloud and are stored on your OneDrive. So this isn't happening on your local machine in a potentially little sandbox environment. It is happening in the cloud, and it is being stored in your any outputs are being stored potentially in your OneDrive if it does output something. So that session data is hosted in your personal OneDrive. Now, just if you're wondering if you have this already turned on or not, or if it's going to be available to you, these are the requirements I put here. So one, this particular Cowork feature, if you have all the other requirements knocked out, it's for those that have already a Copilot license. So this isn't like an additional add-on purchase at the moment. Right now, it's just for those, if you have that 365 license and you have these other requirements down, it'll be available for you and show up basically. And so those other requirements are that you're in the Frontier program. So just to explain what that is real quick, it's basically just in your admin center if you joined it. So if you're maybe freaked out about any new features, you don't want those to roll out yet. Well, a lot of these features, you have to intentionally join the Frontier program and then choose who can, potentially access those, who has access to the Frontier features that get rolled out. So, and that's done there in the admin center under the Copilot settings. You can check that here, to see who's in your Copilot Frontier if you have it turned on, or you could just come to see if it's even available for you at all. And the other things here as well is you'd have to make sure Anthropic is enabled as a subprocessor, which is also just another setting. So these are just, as they roll out new features, there's new settings that'll show up here in the Copilot settings admin in the admin center. And that's just another option here. So AI providers operating as a Microsoft subprocessor. So you'd have to make sure that's enabled there. Also, if you don't want Anthropic enabled, you can just, this is the place to check it as well. Of if you only want that available for certain users or all users, that's an option here. The last thing is what we're going to go over today. This is just for people on more of that standard commercial tenant. So right now this isn't available. This is still an early preview feature, so it's not going to be like in GCC High or anything like that. So what we'll do is I'll go ahead and just to give you an idea, the Copilot Cowork, what we're talking about here. So basically in Copilot, if you have those different requirements that we've talked about here, so you have the license, and if you were to join the Frontier program and had Anthropic enabled in a commercial tenant, you would get this eventually to show up here under your agents. So it would be a new agent called Cowork, and you'll see in the parentheses it says Frontier. So it's saying this is specifically, something that's available in the Frontier program. And basically the difference here is, more than just the chat giving you a response. So a lot of people, I think, have probably tested Copilot and at least previously, wished it could, generate more of a file for you, as opposed to just saying, well, I don't know if I can do that. Here's, some steps of how you can do it yourself. This is basically giving it more of the capability to potentially do those steps for you. So in my example here, I created an analytics report based on the top news posts. So I asked it for a particular, SharePoint site to give me the top viewed news posts. And basically it said it got all the news posts, but it required, a separate analytics endpoint, to get those values. So I asked if it could get the page analytics for the news posts, and it went through, and you'll see it did a handful of tasks. So it's actually able to do a handful of different tasks here and list those out of what it was doing, potentially what its thought process was. So doing multiple steps there, doing a little test, and then ultimately hitting the analytics for each one of those news posts, which we can see here, fetching analytics for all the news posts. So it was actually able to do that itself. give me a little idea here in the table of those different views and unique viewers for the news posts on this particular site. And then what I asked it for here is to put this into an Excel file for me, make a nice report with a little KPI. So I didn't even, ask for a particular kind of visual, KPI. I just asked it to create something for me. And so what it did is it created an Excel document, which is one of its skills, is to work in Excel, to work on Excel documents. And ultimately what it did is, I can look at that preview here, what it output. So it, created a table here with all the news posts with the different values and the link to those posts. And then it just created this KPI for me to give me a visual, so it created a nice little Excel workbook with a KPI. And I could, of course, go back and forth with it. Maybe I want a different KPI. I could ask it to do that. Or I could go open this Excel document, start working on it. And then, if I wanted to do something, I could ask it to come back and keep making changes to it. And basically what's happening at this point is it's output it to my OneDrive. If I actually say, there's a little icon here for open folder in OneDrive. And so if I do that, you'll actually see here that in my OneDrive is where this file lives. And so this could also be, this is subject to change, but this could be looked at also as a downside or an impact of using the Copilot Cowork, is that you could perceive this as clutter in your OneDrive. So if you're working a lot in there, searching for stuff in your OneDrive, you potentially have all these different so each one of your sessions, any of those files are stored as a folder with kind of an ugly naming convention there. This is very similar to the Anthropic's Copilot Cowork behind the scenes. And so that's all living in there as well. So what some people might recommend if you were to have a lot of sessions was, at least in the stage that it is now, potentially you could just delete these and take the files out that you want if you don't want to have all this stuff taken up in your OneDrive. But as we said, this is still an early preview, so they're still working on this and getting feedback. So who knows what ultimately they might change about this. Or of course, you could also ask Cowork to clean it up for you afterwards. If you don't like having all these session folders in your OneDrive. But that's just to explain, where it's putting those outputs. So it's giving you an option to see it here. Now, of course, what I also did to show some of its other skills is after it created this for me, let's say, I liked it, it's good to go. I had it go ahead and email me. And so just to show that idea as well. So it sent an email on my behalf. So as we're mentioning, same with Copilot, it just has access based on your account. So it's running on delegated access to do these different tasks. So you can see in this particular email, it did the attachment for me in the email. It gave me a summary here. And it also came from me. So it, is literally running on my account, doing this on my behalf. So just, put together a nice little email with that attached file in here as well. So, I could continue this session if I wanted to keep doing different things with this, and or start new sessions. And one thing you can do as well, which is interesting, is that if you like this capability, or you like the response that you got, and you want to turn this into a skill, essentially, or maybe you want to be able to replicate what you did again, you'll see that there's a handful of different skills. I put those in the slide as well, the skills that are currently available, PDF, calendar management, Excel, PowerPoint, Word, a handful of different things. You can also create your own skills. That gets a little more advanced, more of a rabbit hole there, but potentially I could use this skill management tool here and actually ask, the Copilot Cowork to create this and turn this into maybe a skill, or maybe schedule this to run. There's also a schedule, capability. I could even just ask it, to schedule this to run like every Friday or something like that, or whatever I would want to basically turn this functionality to give me a report on the analytics of the news post for that site or different sites, and schedule it to run. And what you'll actually notice as well, so if I just come back to the main sort of view for it, if you do have anything scheduled, I currently don't, it'll show up here basically when it's going to go run those tasks. So potentially, the idea is I like what I'm getting from this particular session. I want to have this sort of analytics report running like what it outputs. I could potentially schedule that to run so I could have this as a report, whenever once a week or something like that, or whatever task you wanted to do, and then have it send you an email with it or send it to someone. It can also do things like tests, or some of my other tests. It can post to Teams channels for you and things like that. I don't have that pulled up, but it can do some nice, interesting things. And maybe I can pull it up, but it can, create cards. In one of my examples here, if this pulls up, it created a nice birthday card, so it can use the adaptive cards functionality that's available in Teams, to make like a nice visual for a birthday or whatever it may be. So it has some interesting skills that could be used even just kind of for some more maybe non-work related things that are just more of the social aspect of, you don't want to take time to find a birthday picture, it might create something nice for you. And so some interesting capabilities that can be played around with it. But what we want to keep in mind with this is, right now this is still a early preview feature. And because of that, things are changing fast. For instance, just back in March when this first started to roll out, you had to have a separate commercial agreement with Anthropic. So basically it didn't fall within Microsoft's existing, data privacy, all that type of stuff, those different contracts. So it was not considered ready to use in a production environment. It's just more for early testers. Now that's since changed. They put in the documentation. This is now part of Microsoft's. It meets their existing, whatever it's called, Microsoft addendum, whatever that different security agreement is that you have with Microsoft. But there's still potentially this data boundary issue with it being Anthropic as a sub-processor. So it's not potentially at the moment, not literally using models that are hosted in Microsoft. So, that's potentially still an issue there. So not ready just to roll out potential users. The other side is if someone has a lot of access in your environment and they were to use this, then potentially this Cowork has a lot of access then to do things, because it has whatever the user has access to. Now it's still limited, it can't do anything in SharePoint or whatever else. It can query SharePoint though, and it can do a lot of stuff in your OneDrive. So, you could pull a lot of different type of analytics or whatever else or data from SharePoint if you have access to it. So, and make that easier for a user to do that. So if you were to test this, I think sort of the recommendation is that it's only select users. You wouldn't just be turning this on for everyone. And if you don't have a separate environment to test it in, it may even be having a test account with limited access to use this feature on and applying the Copilot license to that to test it, so that it's not getting all of your, access to all your enterprise data and working on things of that nature. So that's just something to keep in mind. And then, I just put that in the note here. And then also, related to those sessions, they could clutter up your OneDrive as well if you have a lot of sessions going on, which is something people have reported. So some things to keep in mind, but it's definitely, could be this could be a pretty big upgrade to Copilot in terms of what it can do using the Cowork agent. But it's still in the early phases, and, maybe more of just for IT type people or super users to maybe start getting an opinion on it and test it out. They haven't yet put a date from what I've seen in the roadmap for this being generally available. It's just still in the Frontier program. So you still have, some time before being able to even worry about who should have it or not have it. But, and right now, still, like I mentioned, only for standard tenants would even be able to potentially turn this feature on. But a lot of potential capabilities there. And you'll see some of these skills here if you try it out. There's quite a few, and you can create your own as well. So, a lot of things they could potentially do there. So with that in mind, I think that will conclude my presentation, and I'll hand it back to you, Hayden.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dylan. It's very exciting to see the new AI features that are being rolled out. Like Dylan was saying, start with a small group, roll out as needed, maybe even one individual or user or a test account. This is perfect for any leadership, pulling customers, custom simple reports as needed, or checking some analytics throughout. If you are interested in the AI tools that Dylan just showed or other AI tools, do be sure to stick around for Kelly Ann's topic today, because that'll help you get prepared for AI if you're not already utilizing them. But perfect. With that said, let's go ahead and hop into the age-old question of when do we use SharePoint lists? When do we use Excel? Which one's right? Which one's wrong? And Leona's going to dive into that right now. So over to you, Leona.
Awesome. Thank you, Hayden. Yep. In today's presentation, we're going to kind of talk about when should SharePoint lists be used, what benefits do they have versus Excel, and also when should Excel be used. So we're going ahead to just jump right in. So starting off, SharePoint has list views. So views allow you to have kind of predefined representations of your data, whether that just be as right now we can see here, we have just all of our data being presented, but also maybe you want to have your data grouped by specific metadata values. So easily group your data so you can jump into this one and say, hey, I want to just get a quick average of the number of kind of projects we have open. Also, if you have to have a view that's maybe specifically related to the project health or something adjacent to that, we can say, hey, if there is anything that's ever in crisis, we want to have a quick representation of that to make sure that we address these ones first. Or maybe you're an organization that has, hey, a large, pipeline project dashboard in which you want to have different views for different kind of team members. So maybe project managers would have 5 columns, while the little kind of employees who are doing some of the dev work will have 3 columns, and while other executives might have 15 columns being presented. Views allow you to say how many columns in are being represented, and then also if there's any sort of filtering or sorting or grouping, that also can be applied to them. Additionally, Microsoft does provide you a number of different types of group view types. So as of right now, we've seen solely just the list view, but also you get things like the board view. So we can see here, for those who use Planner often, you might see this kind of UI before. This allows you to have things called buckets, which allow you to kind of have headers that have tags. So as of right now, we can have our headers be the portfolio level, where we can see we have unassigned ones, programs, or projects. You can use any of your metadata columns that you have that you can easily create new buckets, move things around, and update their statuses by doing that. So if I say, hey, you know what, this actually should be unassigned, I go ahead and drag it here. It updates that metadata column and reflects that data change. You also get gallery views. Now, gallery views might be a little bit more visual representation of your data, where they're going to be little tiny cards. What's also kind of beneficial to the gallery view is that if you do have any sort of image columns, they can kind of show you a preview of that image onto the screen as well. So maybe you have an assets list in which you have attachments or image fields on there, and then that data can be represented easily via this UI here. You also could have things like a calendar. So again, if you once said that your data is very beneficial to be in a calendar format to track things, calendar formats can also be deployed as well. Next would be the idea of stylizing your views. So as we've seen here, there's a lot of color to this. As we can also go back to our default view, we have a little bit of styling. So Microsoft also allows you to stylize your views or your columns individually if you so desire it. It's very easy to do. All you would have to do is go into your view, click the drop down right where it says the name of the view, and there is a Format Current View option here. Once you're here, you have kind of these initial 2 tabs at the very top. One will be for the view itself, and one will be for the columns. So the view applies to everything, while the columns would apply to just that one piece of metadata. So if I said, hey, you know what, this is the starting view, I like the idea of alternating row colors to make it easier to discern from each row from one another. Or if you said, you know what, I really like the idea of conditional formatting. When a specific rule is met, I want this to change into a different color. It's very easy to build these out. All you do is you click on add a rule here. You choose what piece of metadata do you wish it to kind of be based off of. So we say portfolio level. We say is equal to or not equal to. And then we can also choose the value. Depending on what type of column it is, you might have different types of input. So these are choice columns. So therefore, we're just going to choose the options that are available to us. If it was like a text value or a date value, you'd have different options on how you want this to be kind of a rule that's determined. Then you choose what color it will be. Microsoft gives you a number of different styles you can kind of play around with. Go ahead and play around with it to your heart's content. And once you're happy with that, you can hit the save button, and that will update your rules. Now, also something to be aware of, these rules do based off a priority scale. So the highest it is will kind of supersede the other ones. So again, if you have a rule that's up here that will override these lower ones, it will take the highest rule that you have. Next thing will be the idea of filtering your data. So again, like with Excel, you can filter based off column headers. So if I was to say, hey, I'm looking for project statuses that are maybe planning only, I can hit the apply button. My view gets updated. Now I have a subset of data. If I say, you know what, I also want the column to be specifically this one and this one, I hit the apply, my view gets updated. You can also see all the filters that you have up here at the very top of it. So if you say, you know what, I really want to remove this and I want to remove this and get us back to where we were, it's very easy to clear these out. Additionally, on the far right, there is a clear all. So if you say, I want to just get back to all my data, you can do that as well. Additionally, there is the filter option here, which is this little kind of filter icon next to all the views. This allows you to filter based off all of the unique values that are currently being presented in your view right this moment. So you can easily say, you know what, let me choose this, and then maybe this. And again, maybe some of these criteria aren't going to happen because these are going to be overriding each other. But this allows you to quickly kind of select what you want versus maybe playing around with them one at a time via the column headers. The next thing that we'll probably want to talk about is the MS Forms integration. So by default, Microsoft gives you a very basic form. So if I was to click on new item, we get a little basic form here. Now, maybe your list has 15 pieces of data, but you want to have like an intake form. Maybe there is sales who are going to be doing the start of a project in which they are working with the client. Eventually they say, hey, we do have a project that we're going to be going into. We want them to enter in 5 pieces of information, and we don't want them to see the rest of this data. That's where Microsoft Forms integration can come into play. So there is a button at the very top of your list that says Forms. And then this is where you can create brand new ones, or if you have existing ones, they kind of appear here. So this allows you to use Microsoft Forms on top of your SharePoint list, in which that data will be pushed to your SharePoint list, kind of integrate together. So in my example that I was talking about just before, we want to have a project intake form in which maybe the sales team will have access to the title of the project, the description of it, the start date, the parent program ID, and the parent program name, and maybe portfolio level. But maybe we actually say, you know what, maybe they don't need this piece of information. Maybe they don't need to key in a couple of these pieces of information. This is going to be managed by the project managers later on down in life. So you can determine what fields are available to you here. And then you can send that link to them, which they get a link like this, which they can fill out these pieces of information. So you can put a quick link on your site or a quick link on your left navigation and let them have that quick access to fill out this information without having all the other stuff that comes along with that SharePoint list. The next thing that we would like to also kind of talk about is the item level permission. So there's a couple ways permissions also work with SharePoint. So with SharePoint, you have your items. So you can have item level permission, which is the idea of saying there is specific records that I want to say have different access. So maybe this record number 1 that we have right here, we want to say this is only going to be visible by the members and the owners of the site. We don't want the visitors or anybody else to see it. There's going to be a couple different ways you can do that. First off is by clicking the details panel. And then there's a manage access button. So we're going to go ahead and click on that. And we can take them to this page here. We're going to go ahead and click on the groups tab. And this is where we can go ahead and click on one of these values here. So let's say the hub visitors. We don't want them to have access to this any longer. I can click on their view. I can then say what level of access should they have. And I say, I don't want them to have access to this. I hit apply. This just lets us be aware, hey, you're removing that from this. Are you sure? We're going to say remove. And then we can also do that maybe to the visitors as well. So I'm going to go ahead and select on the visitors. Go ahead and select them and say no direct access. Now, also for those who have used SharePoint in the past, there is also the advanced permissions page. This just kind of integrates the two now together via the UI so that you can also manage the permissions here and dictate what you want to do. This might be a little bit faster where if you say, hey, I want to remove multiple groups all in one fell swoop, I can say remove user permissions, and now, as of this moment in time, only the members and owners can see record number 1 in this list. So that's one way to go about it. There's also going to be an option in the list settings. So I'm going to go ahead and click on the gear, go to the list settings option here. Underneath advanced settings, let me zoom this in a little bit more once we get to the next page. There's going to be a section called item level permissions. This allows you to dictate who can see items and who can also edit or create and edit items. So by default, it's going to be to say read all items and create all items. You can change it to say, hey, you can only read the items that you have created, so which means that you won't know the other ones exist that weren't created by you. Or you can also say who can edit or create items in this list, whether that be all records on the list or maybe items, again, created by that specific user. Also be aware there is a description here that says, hey, users with the cancel checkout permission levels, which are going to be realistically owners unless you use additional permission levels on your site, can kind of overwrite these and kind of see all the records. So if you say, hey, there's meant to be, again, intake from this, but other people aren't meant to see this, and maybe it's like travel authorization or things like that, where it may be a little bit more private on kind of the expenditures that are going on there, this might be a good candidate for that functionality to be deployed. So we'll go ahead and jump back into the next thing, which will be the idea of rules. So let me zoom this back out a little bit more for us. So for those who have used SharePoint in the past, there are things called alerts that used to be able to say when a criteria was met, we're going to go ahead and notify someone. Microsoft is doing away with alerts. If they haven't already done it on your tenant, you've been micromanaging them, but Microsoft is killing those off in the near future. So just be aware, rules are its replacements. Now, rules is the capability of saying, again, when one of these criteria happen here, go ahead and notify someone. So if we say, hey, when a new item is added, we're going to go ahead and notify maybe the assigned to user, or maybe it's me, the person who created it, or maybe the person who's modifying it. You can dictate who will get notifications. So let's just use me right now. I will say whenever an item is created, email me. Now you could also do a condition as well if you wanted to, but we'll make it simple right this second and hit create. So now whenever a new item is added to this list, I will be notified. Additionally, if you ever need to come in here and make modifications, just click on rules again, click on the rule that you wish to make a modification to and make those modifications. If you ever need to turn these off, you can always click this little button here. Additionally, we also have the integration into other applications inside of Office 365. So you have Power Apps, Power BI, and Power Automate. Power Apps is going to be Microsoft's app development platform. It allows you really to maybe build more custom, robust applications, whether that be through forms or full-on applications as a whole, which, as a quick example, if I click on new here, we can see that this form is definitely more functionally different than what we saw previously, where it might have conditional fields. Let's say, hey, when we select this value, this field becomes available to us. This is what Power Apps can potentially do, and far more than what we see right now. Power Automate is Microsoft's automation platform. If you did have any sort of flows on this list that were like manual start flows, you can go ahead and trigger them here. And then also in the export feature, there is export to Power BI. So if you wanted to use your data in Power BI from this list, you can easily do so via this button here. Going into the next thing, which is going to be the export feature as well, you can see here you can also export this data into Excel, into a CSV, or into a CSV with schema. So if you did need to say, hey, you know what, we need to pull this data out, go put it into another application, or send it off to one of our clients or vendors, this is how you can easily do so versus them having to have access to your SharePoint environment. Another thing to be aware of is that SharePoint has version history on by default for all your lists and libraries. So that means that every time a record is ever modified, you can track who made that modification, what fields changed, and when did that change take place. So if you were to click on the ellipses here, there is a version history based off your resolution. This might be somewhere else in your UI. Just be aware if you don't see it up here, it will be in the ellipsis. So if I click on this version history here, we get to see, hey, who are the users who made modifications here? So I can see that I made a modification to the portfolio level on this date at this time. I can see that there are other modifications made to this record during these different times. So this will give us the version number that we're on, the date it was modified, the modified by, and then also any of the metadata fields that are changing here. If you ever did need to go back to a previous version, you can click on the little ellipsis here and say restore. View will just show you the previous version of that iteration. So in essence, you would see all the values there. Or if you say, hey, there is a version that needs to be purged, you can do so via here as well. And kind of the last thing that might be very beneficial to you would be the idea of templates. So Microsoft, if you were ever be creating a brand new list, whether that be through the home page of a site, there is a create button here, or via site contents and making a new one there, you get taken to the kind of how do you want to start. So starting off, there is the capability of starting off with one of these predefined views, which we talked about before, whether it be a list, a gallery, calendar, board, or Microsoft form. You can also import from an Excel document or a CSV, or if you have an existing list on your site that you wish to duplicate, you can do so here as well. But down below that, Microsoft also provides you a number of predefined lists. If you say, hey, you know what, I need an issue tracker, I think this is a pretty good starting point. Maybe we will add more columns to it a little bit later on, but I can go ahead and say use template that will deploy that automatically with all those columns. Additionally, your organization can build additional list formats as well. So if you say, hey, there is a number of columns that we wish to always deploy with one of our lists, whether that be like project tracking or something adjacent to that, you can have your organization create a template that will then be available to your users to easily deploy versus having to rebuild all those columns or update the content type or something adjacent to that. So that's SharePoint side of things. So you know what? SharePoint is fantastic. Now, there does have some limitations, and this is where Excel might really become the workhorse that you would want to have. So with Excel can handle large amounts of data. SharePoint does have some level of limitations. Again, there is the 5,000 item threshold limit for views, which means you need to keep your items underneath the 5,000 if you want to view your data. There's also the 100,000 record limit for inheritance breaking and restoring permissions. And then there's also the pie in the sky where I go, your performance will probably be too devastating once you get into the millions of records range, in which I would say stay away from that. Excel can handle all that far better than SharePoint can. So I go, if you have lots and lots of data, use Excel. Also, Excel has the capability of using pivot tables and pivot charts very easily. So which means that if you want to represent your data in different ways, other than like the view presentations, Excel is phenomenal for that. Lastly will be the idea of formulas. So Microsoft does have some level of calculations and summing and averaging and stuff inside of SharePoint. However, it is baby's first step into calculations and formulas. So I go, if you have any sort of complexity to how you want your data to be calculated, or maybe certain values from multiple different tables, SharePoint's not going to be the thing for that. Go ahead and use Excel because it is far better and far more robust to fulfill those needs. So again, I hope that this kind of paints a better picture on when you might want to use Excel versus SharePoint. And I'll pass it back on to you, Hayden.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Leona. Yeah, we have some clients who absolutely love SharePoint lists and only want to use SharePoint lists. We have other clients who, I mean, we grew up on Excel, right? And they want to use Excel. And the right answer is a little of both, depending on what your use case is. So that was a perfect overview there, Leona. Thank you so much. Last and certainly not least, I want to go ahead and move into Kelly Ann's segment, which she will be kicking off our first of 4-part teachings on preparing your environment in SharePoint for Copilot and other AI tools. Over to you, Kelly Ann.
Kellyanne, you are muted.
I apologize. I guess I didn't hit it hard enough to unmute.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Hayden. I appreciate it. Let's talk about something that impacts every organization using SharePoint as we're all moving into more AI-assisted work. The relationship between content quality and the results that you get from Copilot. There's a common assumption that Copilot will just fix things, but the truth is very different. Copilot amplifies what's already there. Strong content, great results. Chaotic content, chaotic answers. Today's conversation is not a technical deep dive. It's more of a practical conversation about what's happening in a lot of environments and what needs to be true for Copilot to deliver trustworthy answers. Two terms you'll hear throughout this conversation is AI readiness, which in this context is preparing content and governance so that AI works reliably, and oversharing, which in this context means accessing things is broader than what's intended. So let's dig into that now. There are 4 content issues that we run into time and time again across SharePoint environments. The first, unorganized team sites. Sites start out with great intentions and then become file dumps for personal files, legacy documents, contents from old documents, old projects, just kind of sitting together with no clear purpose. The second is ownership and abandonment. People change roles, teams restructure, but the sites usually remain the same. However, the issue with that is nobody knows who owns them anymore. Nobody's maintaining them. And now you've got orphan content with no one to hold accountable for that information. The third, and this one connects directly to AI, mixed content from different time periods confuses Copilot. It doesn't know if a document that you put in there in 2019 is relevant to the question that's being asked about your current today strategy. It treats everything that it can access as the potentially correct response. The fourth, the need for ongoing cleanup and governance. Without it, site sprawl is inevitable, and every ungoverned site leads to noise in Copilot's answers. So what happens in practice? When someone asks Copilot a question, what it does is pull from everything that specific user has the permission to see. So if your site is disorganized, that means outdated drafts are there, incomplete work, duplicate files, and content that's not meant for them. When Copilot goes to compile an answer, it's going to pull from that information, which technically might be correct, but may be misleading to that particular user or unhelpful because it's providing outdated content. Here's the key point. Site structure isn't really about tidiness. It directly affects the quality, clarity, and trustworthiness of every AI-generated answer. For executives, that's a risk conversation. For IT, that's an architecture issue. For business owners, that can cause issues with everyday productivity. This is something that touches everyone. Now, let's look at document libraries. Copilot works best when libraries are aligned with content types or business processes. When a library has clear purpose, Copilot can infer context about what's inside of it. Clean folder structures and consistent naming conventions amplify that further. They help users and Copilot find the content quickly to provide a response. But unfortunately, what we typically see is deep, inconsistent folder setups that are based on my particular choice or his particular choice and not a specific company standard. Over time, what ends up happening is that becomes impossible to navigate. We also run into copy and paste duplication errors where someone grabs a file off of your SharePoint, they put it on their desktop, and that's what they're using as their living, breathing file. And then someone else grabs the file, does the same thing. They both re-upload the file, making small changes to the naming conventions. So now you have multiple versions of the same file with no consistent owner, no consistent source of what the actual truth is. If you multiply that across all the team sites that you have and all the sites on your SharePoint site, that spirals quickly into a mess. When critical information also lives in email attachments instead of in the libraries, that's impossible for AI to view. The bottom line is libraries are designed for both humans and AI. If designed correctly, can reduce friction across the board. When libraries are poorly designed, 3 things happen. The first, Copilot slows down. If the information is scattered and inconsistent, it takes longer for Copilot to review and compile the data to provide your answer to you, which usually ends up with an answer that isn't necessarily the best. The second, you get conflicting responses. If you've got outdated data from multiple sources in the same file, I might ask it a question today, and the answer that I receive will be different than the answer that you receive if you ask the same question tomorrow, because of multiple versions of the same file. The third is the human cost. When people start second guessing the information that Copilot is passing to them by having to go back and recheck to ensure that, yes, the information is today's information, the right version is there, the source belongs to the person who was supposed to have published it, what ends up happening is you've now made what should have been an automated process a manual process, which causes users to stop wanting to use Copilot. It causes you to have an issue with your return on investment conversations for your stakeholders, because why are we continuing to invest in a product that's not providing accurate results? What best to happen is having naming in a consistent manner, set up a clear naming convention for each and every file that's on there. Ensure that the information is accurately and quickly able to be sourced, because that's what Copilot reviews. Every hour that you spend up front cleaning up that information is time that comes off the back end when a response is needed from Copilot. The third foundation and the most underused is metadata. Metadata is how Copilot understands context beyond the words on a page. So the status, the category that the document belongs to, who the owner of the document is, what type of content it is, the date that it's effective, and the department it belongs to. These specific signals tell Copilot whether a document is a draft or a final, whether a policy is a current one or one that's retired, whether it's something that needs to be internal facing or client facing. In most environments, metadata fields exist, but they're either optional or very rarely or incompletely used, which causes Copilot to have to use the file name to determine if that document is the most updated. So something like the final version 3, use this one. Also in that library will be final version 3 without the use this one. What that ends up causing is Copilot to infer confusion, because if you've got two documents that say they're final, which is really the best, what it's going to do is review that information and provide you an answer from one or either of them, or may do even more. It may combine answers from both of them, which cause the information to be completely incorrect. Without a strong metadata system, Copilot is going to have to infer from what it's able to find. And that's where inaccuracies creep in and continue to pile on. Improving metadata isn't just an IT task. If you set up the columns, that's IT, that's the technical portion, but it's going to take consistent user interaction with them for that information to be filled out. So what you're going to need is buy-in from both. You're going to need IT to set it up, and you're going to need the users to continue to support it. When you get it right, the payoff is significant for search results that you receive from Copilot. Excuse me. When metadata is missing, the precision drops. Summaries become broader and more generic. Instead of it telling you, here's the current policy approved in January, you're going to get a mix-up of information that may have been published back in March, something published in 2022, which means I'm going to have to go back and see, okay, is this really what I'm looking for? And that's not what you want. What ends up happening is the user trust goes down and usage goes down. But here's the encouraging part. Improving metadata will have a disproportionately positive effect on everything. Though it's one of the longest things to do, it's one of the highest leveraging items that you can do. If you start with your most critical libraries and add the status fields, add content types, and get users and teams in the habit of tagging it properly, incremental changes will make a huge difference in quality overall. What I'd like to do is I want to reframe some of organizations, something that organizations often get backwards. AI readiness isn't really about the AI tool. It's about the foundation that you set for it to use. You can turn Copilot on tomorrow, but if the content that's within your SharePoint sites is disorganized, outdated, purely structured, Copilot is going to reflect that like a mirror. Content discipline means documents are current, purposeful, and stored intentionally. People will know where things are, how to find them, and how to maintain them. That's a culture and process change, not just a technology one. Governance maturity takes it further. Who owns the content, how it's classified, and when it's reviewed. That becomes the difference between a site that evolves with the business or making it a digital file cabinet that's no one's looking into anymore because you're not sure what you're going to get out of it. Here's my reality check. If you wouldn't trust a new employee to find the right document on your SharePoint site without having to call several people to ask where to find it, Copilot's going to run into the same issue. All it'll happen is it'll just expose the inaccuracies faster because it's going through the documents faster. The upside, though, is very real. Improving content and governance doesn't just help Copilot bring you information back. It also improves collaboration, compliance, onboarding, and knowledge overall within your organization. Let's bring everything we've talked about back together. If you remember one thing from this conversation, remember that Copilot amplifies what currently exists. It cannot and will not fix the structure, fix the governance, or fix the quality of the content that's out there. The 4 foundations that matter the most are site design, library organization, metadata, and governance. If anyone is weak, Copilot's outlook is going to reflect that in vague answers, inconsistent results, or content that's being returned that shouldn't be. When those foundations are strong, the experience changes. More relevant insights, clearer summaries, and outcomes that can be trusted on the first response. If your SharePoint is messy today, Copilot makes that mess visible almost immediately. The time to address that is before you turn it on. But the good news about that is you don't have to tackle it alone. We're here to help if you need. And for more information on this, we'll be continuing this conversation in June. In June, we'll be discussing permissions, access, governance, lifecycle, what Copilot has the potential to expose, Copilot and Copilot Cowork. We'll be building on the conversation that Dylan had with us about what Cowork is, how it functions, and we'll also be listing more practical readiness steps. I invite you to pay attention to your emails for when the June dates come out and join us then. I'll turn it back over to you, Hayden. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kelly Ann. Just to echo that, AI is only as good as the content it looks to. So go ahead and start looking into this now. But again, this is just the first of 4-part teaching to get you and your team prepared for AI as we move forward towards that. Thank you to Kelly Ann and all the other presenters today. I know we're running low on time, so I'm going to simplify my kind of closing spiel, if you will. We're about to move into the live Q&A. Friendly reminder, all of the slides, the content, the notes that you see today will be hosted on the SharePoint learning portal for our support clients. If you don't have access to that, reach out to us. We want to make sure that you get access to all the information that you need. If you don't plan on staying for the live Q&A, thank you again for learning with us today. It was a pleasure to see you all. On the screen, we are showing instructions on how to raise your hand to ask questions. If you don't feel comfortable with unmuting your mic, feel free to use the QA chat feature in the toolbar, but we'll answer questions as hands are raised and unmute you, and we'll go from there. All right, doesn't look like there's any questions today. That's perfectly fine. It's so good to hang out and teach and show you guys all this stuff and learn with you all today. Feel free to reach out to us if you do have questions, and be on the lookout in your emails for the next webinar. Talk to you all soon.